You are live.
Woo! Hello, everyone. My name is Mariana, and I am a park interpreter specialist for California State Parks. So I work for this symbol on my hat. I'm so excited to be here with you all for a Castle to Coast virtual junior ranger program. Woo! So exciting. This is the last week. But don't you worry, because there will be other virtual programs throughout the school year to participate in. I am currently at Morro Bay State Park, and I am wearing a mask because I am in the public. So you might be able to hear people in the background walking, talking, enjoying this space. And I will do my very best to use my loud voice so you can hear me. And I'm wearing my mask to protect myself and others around. And for right now, I just want to give you a quick view of the area that I'm in. I am located near a very important landmark for Morro Bay State Park, and that is Morro Rock. So this is the view of Morro Bay from the rock. It is a very gloomy summer day, and that's very typical for this area, and it's a little bit chilly, so I am wearing my jacket to keep myself warm. Hopefully the fog will break open so we can see a little bit of the beautiful sky, but if not, it's still a beautiful view. And I want to point out something really quick. These little black dots on my screen are southern sea otters. Yep, that's right. You heard that correctly. Sea otters. They call Morro Bay home, and there's a few of them out. There's usually more in this area, but I think they're all out finding food. That's okay. We got to see a few of them, and that's a pretty lucky wildlife sighting. So I'm super excited. We're going to be talking about seabirds and seabird adaptations. I love seabirds, so I'm so excited that I get to share some of my knowledge of the cool wildlife that we have here. Oh, that was a bird flying by. That was a seabird, and I'll talk a bit about that seabird in a bit. But Morro Bay is home to many different types of birds. Birds that can be seen in the trees or on the ground and even in the water. And those water birds are what we are going to be learning about. We call those seabirds. Makes sense, right? Morro Bay, or birds that like to be in the water, seabirds. And I have an image to show you of where I am at Morro Bay and where Morro Bay is before we really dive deeper into learning about the seabirds. So Morro Bay is located on the central coast of California. We are 4 hours south of San Francisco and 4 hours north of Los Angeles. And this is a map of Morro Bay State Park. There is quite a bit of land, and I am located near Morro Rock. So that is, the Morro Rock is on the top left part of this map. There's a label that says Morro Rock. That is where I am currently at. So let's get to it and learn about some of the seabirds at Morro Bay State Park. You might already know a few seabirds. If you recognize this bird, this is a seabird, and this is a brown pelican. I think they're pretty neat seabirds, and it's a very common bird to see here. You might even know this bird. Whoa, I wonder what that could be. I think I heard someone shout penguin. Yeah, you are correct. This is a penguin, and penguins are also seabirds. So you already know a few seabirds. That's pretty amazing. And we're going to be learning about what a seabird is and their adaptation. So what is a seabird? A seabird is a bird that primarily makes its living in the ocean, and it gets all of its food source from the ocean. That's a huge characteristic of being a seabird, is getting all of their food from it. And that includes fish, squid, some of those other ocean life. So that's really what a seabird is. And they spend most of their time, look at, there's more seabirds right behind me. Those are pelicans. So that image that I showed you earlier, well, there they are in live time. Pretty neat. Hopefully they'll be flying around more. But again, seabirds get all of their food from the ocean, and they also spend the majority of their time out at sea. That's the second really important characteristic of being a seabird. And it's really special when they come to land, because they only come to land for a few reasons, and I'll explain those reasons throughout the program. They usually are thousands and thousands of miles away from the closest land. That is amazing. So that is how we would describe a seabird. And seabirds have some pretty awesome adaptations to living life out at sea. What could an adaptation mean? I'm hearing some responses. If you're saying that an adaptation is something an animal has or does to make it easier to live in their environment, well, you would be correct. That's exactly what an adaptation is. An adaptation is something that makes it more efficient for an animal to live in their home. So seabirds have some pretty awesome adaptations. Some adaptations are so special to seabirds that if you see it on a seabird, you'll know that what you're looking at is definitely a seabird. And let's find out what some of those adaptations are. But first, let's check out this cool seabird. This is an Atlantic puffin. It's not found here, but I think they're super cool, and I wanted to share a picture of them. And I want to take a few moments to make some observations about this seabird. I hear people talking about feathers. Yeah, it's an important feature to have. I see their feet look a little bit different. Very interesting. They have really bright orange beaks and feet. That's cool. I noticed that they have the color of their feathers are dark on their backside and light on their belly side. Those are just a few observations that I made. Well, let's see if those are adaptations to seabirds. Okay. So one important adaptation that I noticed in this picture are feathers. So let's take a closer look at those feathers. Seabirds are like birds. They have feathers, but the feathers are a little bit different in seabirds. Seabirds tend to have more feathers compared to the birds that spend all their time on land. And those extra feathers help with buoyancy, so helping keep the bird afloat, floating on the surface of the water. That's a really important characteristic to have. So those extra feathers help with keeping them above the surface of the water. And those extra feathers help with warmth. Some seabirds spend all their life in very cold weather, like the penguin. The penguin has so many feathers, and they have a lot of feathers because it's so cold where they're at, and they need those feathers to stay warm, to help with floating. So those are two really important reasons why they have extra feathers, and their feathers help with water resistance. So water is able to just run off their bodies. It doesn't get absorbed, which would be pretty important, especially if they spend most of their life out at sea, is that they don't want the water to be absorbed in their feathers. It would make them really heavy. So those extra feathers help with that part of their lives. So those are three different adaptations with just having extra feathers. But not only that, but seabirds have a particular color associated with them. And here is an image of that color pattern that we see in a lot of seabirds. This is an albatross, and if you're lucky enough, you might be able to see this bird here at Morro Bay State Park. I have seen it once, and I've lived in this area for about 5 years. It was a very exciting day. What are some things that you notice about this color? Did you say you see those dark feathers on the back side? Yeah, I see that too. I definitely see that the back side of this bird has dark feathers, those black feathers. I also noticed that on the bottom side, or the belly side of this bird, it's white feathers. That's a really important adaptation that seabirds have. They usually have those dark feathers on their backside and light feathers on the bottom. Why might that be? I'm trying to think back. Why might that be important for a bird to have, or a seabird to have? Well, this color pattern helps with camouflage. It helps them stay hidden from predators and prey. So if there is a bird that is hunting a seabird, that seabird will be protected because of those dark feathers. Those dark feathers blend in to the dark ocean, making it very difficult for a bird flying above it to see it. So that's one important reason that we see those dark feathers on the backside of seabirds. And the same goes for underneath. If a seabird is looking for food, maybe fish or squid, that prey would be below them. And one way they can sneak up on their prey is because they have those light feathers underneath. The light feathers camouflage with the bright sky. So fish might not be able to see that seabird that is flying above it. So those are really important adaptations that we see in seabird feathers. That was a lot of information. We talked about how they have extra feathers to keep them warm, to help with water resistance, and to keep them afloat. And they have some pretty cool color patterns. And I'll give an example of this color pattern on another seabird, a seabird that many of you probably recognize. And if I see any close by, I will show you in a live time. Thinking back to that Atlantic puffin image, what are some other body parts that maybe help seabirds live out at sea? I'm thinking their feet. Their feet were kind of interesting looking in that image that I had you all look at and make some awesome observations. Well, here's a close-up of a seabird's feet. Well, their feet are webbed. They have webbed feet. I'm trying to think, why might that help out? Well, webbed feet are kind of like flippers. Flippers, I know from experience, and maybe some of you know, if you put flippers on to swim in the pool or ocean, that it's more efficient in swimming in that water. So I think that's why seabirds have webbed feet. And that would be right. They have webbed feet to make it more efficient in swimming in the water. And we see that with all seabirds, and even birds that don't necessarily live all the time in the water, but use the water to find other types of prey. So the webbed feet help with swimming. It's a really important adaptation to have, I think. So we talked about feathers, we talked about feet. What else did I notice when I was making observations about seabirds? I noticed their wing shape. This is a really beautiful picture, and it has this seabird has its wings out. Well, it turns out that seabird wing shape is a little bit different compared to the birds that live on land or terrestrial birds. Seabirds tend to have longer wings, and they tend to be more narrow and thin out to a point. You can see that in this image right here. The wing of this seabird is narrowing out and tapering off to a point. And that really helps with, there are a lot of brown pelicans. I wanted to share, those are all brown pelicans flying away. Give you a moment. Have to show you the seabirds if I'm going to be talking about them. Okay, that was a big group. Maybe there'll be more in a bit. But seabirds fly for very long distances, and having a wing shape the way that I describe it makes it more efficient to fly across large amounts of water. So if they're flying across an ocean, it makes it easier. It's more efficient. They don't have to use as much energy to fly long distances compared to terrestrial birds. So that's a very important adaptation that seabirds have. And the last physical adaptation that I want to mention is one that's very difficult to see. It's actually within the head portion of the seabird, and that is the salt gland. The salt gland. And I have an image of a beak. A salt gland plays a tremendous role in keeping this bird hydrated. And I'll talk more about this image in just one moment, but a salt gland is able to remove excess salt. So seabirds spend a lot of time out at sea. They don't come across fresh water very often. They are surrounded by salt water. And so these birds need fresh water, but how do they do that if they can't come across it very often? Well, seabirds are able to drink salt water. What? That's pretty amazing. I know that our bodies would not be able to handle drinking salt water. We are not adapted to being able to do that. The seabirds are, and the salt gland helps with that. The seabird drinks that salt water, and that salt gland removes that extra salt out of that water, and it comes out in a form of a drip. So there's a little water droplet at the end of this bird's beak. And that is where that extra salt is going to be. That little drop has all of that extra salt. And the salt gland is also able to remove the salt that is in their food. Their food is pretty salty. It spends all of its life out at sea, and it lives in the ocean. And so the salt gland helps remove also that excess salt from their food as well. So those are a few physical adaptations that seabirds have and what makes it a seabird. But there also are a few behavioral adaptations. So those are things that seabirds do in order to live in their environment. So we just talked a lot about those physical adaptations, which are body parts, to make it easier for them to live in their environment. And we talked about those extra feathers, the color pattern of those feathers. They have webbed feet to make it easier to swim. They have long, narrow wings that taper off to an end so they can fly large distances effortlessly. And then they also have the salt gland that helps remove salt from their food and drinking water. So those are 5 different physical adaptations that we went over. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some of those behavioral adaptations. There's a little bit less that I'm going to be going over because I definitely want to share some cool facts about some seabirds that we see here at Morro Bay. And there's actually a seabird right next to me. We'll be talking about this bird a little bit later, but I just wanted to share it with you since it's right here. Just relaxing. Okay, so seabirds are long-lived animals. What does that mean? Well, let's break it up. Long-lived. Long means many years, and lived is just being alive. So they live for many, many, many years. And that's a little bit different compared to birds that we see on land. Because seabirds spend a lot of their time out at sea, they're in a changing environment. The ocean changes in a lot of ways. It can change by weather. Weather is definitely a big influence. It can change in water temperature. So the water itself can be warm, cold, and that water temperature affects where the fish is going to go. So the ocean is always changing, and seabirds have to learn how to adapt, how to change their behavior so they can survive for a long period of time. But it takes a really long time to learn how to change with their environment. So they need to be alive for a decent amount of time before they can start having babies of their own and teaching those babies how to also change with their environment. So seabirds are long-lived animals. There is a record, I believe, not a record, but I've heard of a seabird staying alive for up to 50 years. That's a really long time for an animal to be alive. And those beginning years are just trial and error in trying to find prey and how to change with their environment. So they are long-lived animals. And that definitely affects when they have chicks and how many chicks they have. So if you're ever walking around on land hiking, you might be able to come across a bird's nest. Usually a land or a terrestrial bird will have many eggs in one nest. And they'll do that several times throughout the year. Well, a seabird is different. They usually have one chick every year. That's a really big difference compared to terrestrial birds. And that is because they have to spend more energy and time caring for each chick that they have compared to those birds that live on land. It's a very big difference. And that means that seabirds are very vulnerable to drastic changes in their environment. They're only able to have one chick at a time, and they care for that chick for months and months and months. You don't see that in a lot of land birds. They usually take care of them for a few weeks at most, and then they move on. But with the seabird, they spend an extraordinary amount of time making sure that that chick survives, because it's only one chick, and it'd be very unfortunate for that bird population if those chicks do not survive. So they have to spend a lot of time and effort. Really big difference between seabirds and terrestrial birds. And we see that type of breeding in a lot of long-lived animals. So that's very common for animals that are long-lived to take more care of their young because they have fewer of them. Wow, I'm seeing a lot of birds fly by. That's pretty cool. So they're long-lived and they have less chicks per year, and just overall they have less chicks. They also have a cool difference in breeding techniques. So you'll see seabirds have colonial nesting. That might be a new word for many of you, and I have an image of that. This is an example of colonial nesting, and that is where there are thousands and thousands of seabirds that get together and nest, rest, and have their young on land. So this is a reason why they come back to land. Like I said, they spend the majority of their life out at sea, and when they're ready to come to land, it's mostly to have young and to rest. And you'll see islands or rocky cliffs have birds like this on it. So when you see a lot of birds like this on a particular area, it's mostly a nesting site for them, and we call that colonial nesting. It'd be pretty amazing if we saw that on in land birds. Land birds don't have colonial nesting. They usually nest here and there on different trees, have maybe on the ground, but not in large groups like this. What an amazing sight to see. And so that wraps up those behavioral adaptations that seabirds have. And also with behavioral adaptations, that includes diet as well. But they get all their food from the ocean. We're going to expect that seabirds eat fish, squid. Sometimes they might be able to crack open those hard shell organisms. And that is also a type of behavior that we would see. So we talked about physical adaptation as well as behavioral adaptation. So I'm gonna share with you now two different seabirds that are very common in Morro Bay, and I think they're pretty cool to share. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about them. And I showed you an image of this particular seabird, but I'm going to talk more about it. And this bird was in Finding Nemo. Maybe some of you can recognize it from this image, but I'm here to share a little bit of information about our wonderful brown pelicans. This is an awesome image of a brown pelican flying. I love brown pelicans. One, they're very big, but they also have some cool adaptations as well. Give you a moment to just take in this incredible seabird. And we had quite a few flying by, so that's amazing. And I'm gonna go ahead and take it back to my face now that you know what a brown pelican looks like. And I even have a cool stuffed animal of my brown pelican. I'm gonna hold it while I speak about it. Brown pelicans are usually found in estuary environments. Estuary, what does that mean? It might be a new word for many of you, but an estuary is where fresh water and salt water meet and mix. It provides a whole different type of environment for many different types of animals. It has its own unique plant life and wildlife. So that is what an estuary is. And in fact, we are looking at part of an estuary. Yeah, that is right. So we have salt water that comes from the Pacific Ocean, and then we have fresh water that runs down our rivers, creeks, and streams, usually coming from the mountains that we have, or hills, and they mix and they create our estuary. So brown pelicans are usually found in estuaries, and I think they're pretty awesome because of how they get their food. Brown pelicans can fly up to 65 feet in the air and dive head first into the water. Whoa, that is really high. And to put that into perspective, I have an image of a standard telephone pole. Here we go. This is what a standard telephone pole looks like. A standard telephone pole is about 36 feet tall. So a brown pelican will be flying about 2 telephone pole high up in the air. That's how high it's going to be. That's really tall. I don't know about you, but I don't think I could jump in the water from 65 feet in the air. That would be pretty scary, I think. So it's pretty amazing that these birds can be flying 65 feet in the air. They dive down head first, and when they get to the water, they open up their beak and they swoop up water. They swoop up maybe about 1 to 2 gallons of water. That's a lot of water, and they're able to squish down their bill or beak, and they release all of that extra water that they don't want, and they trap their food in their throat, and then they gobble it up. So that is how a brown pelican gets its food. Pretty amazing adaptation that they have. Super cool to be able to just dive down from extraordinary heights and open up their throat pouch. So that's why they have that extra skin underneath. So that way they can hold a lot of water and trap a lot of prey in it. So it's a really cool adaptation that the brown pelican has. And it's a very common bird to see. And there's even another bird that can be found in this area and probably near you as well. It is known as the western gull, but I'm sure many of you have been taught it as a seagull. And that's because it's a type of gull and it lives by the sea. So it makes sense why many of us have learned that this bird is called a seagull, or any of the gulls that live near the sea called a seagull. But this is the western gull, and it's the bird that I showed you earlier. It's still there. That is the western gull. And I grew up not near the water, and let me tell you, we had hundreds and hundreds of western gulls at my school. And that's because this seabird is a little bit different compared to other seabirds, especially the brown pelican. The brown pelican gets its own food, while the western gull is an opportunist feeder. Ooh, excuse me. And that means it takes every opportunity to find food. You can see a western gull stealing food from a brown pelican. What? Yeah, that's pretty amazing. They are opportunist feeders, and that's why you might see a lot of western gulls near trash cans or near humans, because humans, unfortunately, accidentally leave some food behind, and a western gull is going to take full advantage of that and steal it. So they are, again, opportunist feeders. Very different from our brown pelicans. And I have a close-up image of our western gull. And from this image, you might notice one adaptation that I mentioned earlier in the program on this bird. And that is its color pattern. It matches up with the description that I mentioned that a lot of seabirds have. And that is those dark feathers on the back side of the bird, and then you see lighter feathers on the belly side. So western gulls are an example of this type of characteristic that we see in a lot of seabirds. And in this image, we are able to see those webbed feet. it was a little bit difficult to see the webbed feet on the brown pelican, but you can see it clearly on this image of a western gull. And a fun fact about western gulls is the red dot that can be seen on the yellow beak. Wow, why might it have a red dot on the yellow beak? Well, it's a very important visual cue for young western gulls or chicks. So when a chick is very hungry, it lets its parent know by pecking at that red dot. That's pretty amazing. I think so, that a young western gull is able to communicate with its parent by pecking at that red dot. So a really cool fact about western gulls. So those are two seabirds that we see here at Morro Bay State Park, but you might be able to see them wherever you are as well. And to wrap up this program, I just want to mention that seabirds play a very important role in letting us know the health of the ocean. We expect to see a lot of seabirds where there is plenty fish and other type of wildlife. It's difficult to tell how healthy the ocean is because we don't spend our time underneath there. As humans, we are land animals. We spend a lot of our time on land, and so it's easy to see something that is above the surface. And seeing the amount of seabirds is one way we can tell if we have a healthy environment underneath the water. So seabirds definitely play a very important role in finding out the health of this area. And fortunate for us, we have a lot of seabirds and birds in general that love to call Morro Bay home. Sometimes in the winter, we even have up to 20,000 birds that visit here. Both birds that live here all year round and birds that only come here to rest. So they're in the middle of their migration. They'll stop by Morro Bay because there is plenty of food and resting areas for all those amazing birds. So that wraps up today's program. I hope that everyone has a lovely rest of the day. And I'm so excited that I got to share some of my knowledge about seabirds. And I hope to see you tomorrow for our very last Castle to Coast program. Our Thursdays are Parks PE. Well, you'll be up at Hearst Castle with Laura doing some exercises there and then heading down the coast to me to do some exercises near the beach. So I'm so excited. Hopefully we'll see you there tomorrow. Again, it's at 10 a.m. on our YouTube page, San Luis Obispo Coast District, and you can also reach us through our Facebook pages as well. Morro Bay State Parks and Hearst and Simeon State Park. Again, my name is Mariana, and I hope that everyone is continuing to stay safe and healthy. Have a lovely rest of your day.